I sat at my kitchen table, the chipped bluebonnet mug still warm in my hands, as the manager's words echoed through the phone. A $2,300 handbag, purchased with your Social Security card. A handbag. After 40 years of careful budgeting, after raising a son who swore family came first, after 73 years of living within my means, I was nothing more than a stolen swipe of plastic to my own daughter-in-law. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The phone rang at 9:12 a.m. just as Ruth Delgado was pouring her second cup of coffee. The mug, a chipped one with faded bluebonnet, trembled slightly in her hand. Not many people called this early unless something was wrong. Mrs. Delgado? The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, female. Yes, this is she. This is Janelle Carter, store manager over at Leylon Boutique in the Galleria. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Ruth's brow furrowed. Leylon? She'd never stepped foot inside. Go ahead. I'm calling to verify a transaction that came through this morning. A Social Security debit card was used on a $2,300 purchase, and protocol requires us to confirm identity when the payment method raises certain flags. Ruth's heart stalled. Excuse me, did you say a Social Security card? Yes, ma'am. It was one of those Direct Express cards, issued under the name Ruth Delgado. That's you, correct? Ruth set her coffee down, hand suddenly unsteady. Yes, that's my name. But I didn't make any purchase, certainly not at your store. There was a pause just long enough to let the weight of her words settle. I see. The card was presented along with a matching photo ID. We do our best to screen for fraud, but we're required to follow up in cases like this. Ruth's voice sharpened. Describe the woman who used it. She was mid to late 30s, light brown hair, designer jeans, red heels, sunglasses on indoors, seemed confident. Her name, Carla Delgado, was on the ID. Ruth sat down hard on the kitchen chair. Her knees wouldn't support her. That's my daughter-in-law. I'm very sorry to hear that, Janelle said, tone softening but remaining professional. Should we consider the transaction unauthorized? Ruth opened her wallet with trembling fingers. The compartment where she kept the Direct Express card was empty. My card is gone, she whispered, more to herself than to Janelle. We're holding the receipt and security footage on file, in case you need it. Would you like me to place a temporary hold on the account for further charges? Yes, Ruth said, her voice now brittle steel. Do that. After the call ended, she sat frozen for a long moment, staring at the pale morning light slanting through the kitchen. Blinds, her world felt suddenly distant, as if everything around her had slipped 3 inches out of place. The back door creaked open. Betty Harris walked in without knocking, as usual. She carried a pie tin wrapped in foil and a face that could read a storm before it hit land. Brought you peach cobbler? Figured you didn't eat? Yet Ruth didn't answer. Betty's eyes narrowed. What's wrong? Ruth didn't look up. Carla used my Social Security card to buy a $2,300 handbag, pretended to be me, had the nerve to show them ID with my name on it. Betty set the cobbler down and moved to sit across from her. That's not a mistake, she said firmly. That's a theft. Ruth finally met her gaze. Her eyes, though rimmed in disbelief, no longer shimmered with confusion. They had begun to burn. She's been in my home. She smiled in my face last week like nothing was wrong. They count on you being too tired, too nice, too old, Betty said. You're none of those things. Ruth reached across the table, took her wallet again, and stared at the empty card slot. Her fingers gripped the leather so hard it squeaked. She took a deep breath, long, controlled, and exhaled like someone resetting her entire nervous system. Then I'll treat it like one. Betty tilted her head. Like what? Ruth stood slowly, voice low, purposeful. A theft. She walked over to her small kitchen drawer, the one that held notepads, stamps, and the number to her credit union, and pulled out a yellow legal pad. Betty? Yeah? Get your reading glasses. I'm writing everything down. The next morning, Ruth sat at her dining table with a yellow legal pad to her left, a mug of black coffee to her right, and her old laptop open in front of her. The screen was smeared with fingerprints. The keys slightly faded, but it powered up just fine. Like her, it was older, slower, but still working. She logged into her Direct Express account. It took longer than she remembered to get through the security question. Her hands hovered over the keys a beat too long after each answer, as if her body was already bracing for what she didn't want to see. When the transaction list loaded, Ruth's breath caught in her chest. 4 withdrawals in 2 weeks, all from high-end stores she'd never set foot in. Names she'd only seen printed in magazines at the library checkout counter. $1,275. Belmonte, August 27th. $2,300. Leylon Boutique, September 3rd. $895. Shane and Gold, 09/05. $1,040. Nordwell Designer Outlet, September 6th. A lump formed in her throat. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. This was a spree. She scrolled again, just to be sure. No groceries, no utility payment, not a dime spent on anything that looked like her life. From down the hall, the front door opened with a familiar jingle. Ethan's keychain always clinked against the brass doorknob. "Mom? You home?" he called. "In here," Ruth replied, keeping her voice steady. Ethan appeared in the doorway, looking disheveled and underslept. He ran a hand through his thinning hair and gave her a weak smile. "Carla said you were upset yesterday," he began, sitting across from her without being invited. "I was," Ruth said, eyes still on the screen. "I am." Ethan glanced at the laptop. "What's all that?" "Charges. From my social security card. 4 of them. Big ones. Designer stores." He leaned in, then immediately leaned back. "Well, maybe it's a clerical error," he said too quickly. "Those things happen. Government systems are messy." Ruth finally looked up, her face unreadable. "Do you honestly think I'd confuse a $2,300 handbag for a clerical error?" Before Ethan could answer, a voice floated in from the hallway like a gust of perfume and ego. "Babe, where's my black Saint Laurent bag? The new one with the gold zipper?" Carla swanned into view wearing yoga pants, a cropped hoodie, and sunglasses despite being indoors. On her wrist was a brand new Michael Kors watch, tags still dangling like trophies. She stopped mid-step when she saw Ruth at the table. "Well, well," Carla smiled. "Didn't realize we were having an interrogation this morning." Ruth said nothing, just let her eyes travel to the white shopping bag Carla was carrying. Bold serif letters spelled Shen and Gold. Ruth's gaze dropped lower, to the bag's side, where the SKU tag still clung to the handle. She memorized the 6-digit model number and flipped back through her account. $895. Shane and Gold. Same day. Same amount. She felt the flush rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but a heat made of insult and fury. Carla looked down at her nails. "You know, Ethan, we really ought to take your mom shopping one of these days. Get her out of this beige phase." Ruth stood, slow and deliberate. She stepped past Ethan, past Carla, and into the kitchen. She retrieved the notepad and pen she'd left beside the toaster. Betty's voice echoed in her mind. "Write it all down. This will be evidence," she wrote. September 6th. Shane and Gold. $895. Carla had matching bag. Model number 248317. Then, September 3rd. Leylon. $2,300. Confirmed by Janelle Carter. Card used. She kept writing. Every charge, every store, every item she could visually connect. As she scribbled, Ethan and Carla's chatter turned to background noise, irrelevant, distant, muffled by her growing resolve. Later that evening, when the house was finally quiet, Ruth sat in front of her laptop again. She opened her email. 2. Marcus.green@ssa.gov. Subject: Urgent. Suspected fraud. SSA benefits attachments. Screenshots. Photos of receipts. Handwritten timeline. Dear Mr. Green, my name is Ruth Delgado. I believe I've been the victim of financial exploitation involving my Social Security benefit. I'm attaching documentation and would appreciate a time to speak in person. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The Social Security field office off Westheimer was one of those squat, gray buildings tucked between a check-cashing joint and a strip mall nail salon. Ruth hadn't been here in over a decade. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and lukewarm vending machine coffee. She clutched her yellow legal pad to her chest like armor. At the reception desk, she gave her name. "I have an appointment with Marcus Green." The receptionist didn't look up from her keyboard. "He'll come get you. Take a seat." Ruth sat by the window, her back straight despite the ache beginning to settle between her shoulders. A toddler screeched in the corner. A man across from her coughed like he meant it. Still, Ruth's mind was quiet, focused. 10 minutes later, a tall black man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped into the lobby. He looked around once, eyes scanning the room with practiced efficiency, then called her name. Mrs. Delgado? She stood quickly. That's me. He extended a hand. Marcus Green. I appreciate you coming in. His handshake was firm, but not aggressive. Ruth followed him down a narrow hallway, past rows of outdated cubicles and buzzing fluorescent lights. Everything smelled faintly like paper and toner. He led her into a small, windowless office with neatly stacked files, a government-issued desktop, and a worn chair across from his. Have a seat, he said. Would you like some water? No, thank you. Ruth sat, still gripping her pad. Marcus took his seat and opened a manila folder labeled Delgado Ruth M. in block print. You emailed last night with documentation. I went through it this morning. She nodded, unspeaking. You included receipts, annotated purchases, store names, even model numbers of the items your daughter-in-law now possesses. That's more evidence than most people come in with. He clicked a pen and leaned forward slightly. Let me be clear. This qualifies as elder financial exploitation under federal statute. That means criminal investigation, possibly felony charges, depending on how deep this runs. Ruth swallowed hard, voice dry. By my own son's wife. Marcus didn't blink. That doesn't change what it is. Blood doesn't exempt theft. He let that hang for a beat. Ruth stared at a crack in the laminate on his desk, as if something sacred had just been broken. I want to press charges, she said finally, if that's what it takes to stop her. It is. And more. Marcus turned his monitor to face her. This is your account ledger from the SSA Direct Express system. I cross-referenced your physical transactions with vendor logs. 4 confirmed matches. 3 occurred in person with ID and card present. The one at Leyland? We have security footage from the store manager, who also flagged the card. Ruth's eyes flicked to the screen. She saw a paused frame, Carla at the boutique counter, smiling, handing something across. The still was blurry, but the entitlement was clear as day. She used my name, Ruth said, quieter now. She used me. Marcus nodded solemnly. She did. And depending on what your son knew, or ignored, he may be implicated too. Ruth flinched. He leaned back. I'm going to assign this a formal case number. You'll receive a printed summary in the mail, but today, I'm logging it in the federal database and starting a full investigation. He pulled a white card from a drawer and slid it across the desk. My direct number. My personal email's on the back. You don't wait on hold. You contact me directly if anything else happens. Any new purchases, threats, pressure. Understood? Ruth nodded slowly, then firmer. Understood. I'll need a formal statement before the end of the week, he added. But I can tell already, you'll write it better than most lawyers could. She gave a dry, humorless smile. I was a librarian. Facts are my religion. Marcus smiled back, more gently now. Then let's build a case worthy of your name. The invitation came in the form of a cheery voicemail from Ethan. Hey Mom, Carla's making her famous lemon chicken tonight. Thought it might be nice to catch up. Just us. No pressure. 6 o'clock? Ruth replayed the message twice. No pressure. She almost laughed. By the time she pulled into their subdivision that evening, the sun was dipping below the pine tree, throwing long shadows across the pristinely manicured lawns. Every house looked identical, artificially perfect, like the kind of neighborhood built more for HOA meetings than real lives. Ethan answered the door with a nervous energy, pulling it open too fast. Hey, Mom! You look great. I look exactly the same, Ruth said, stepping inside. Carla's voice floated from the kitchen like syrup laced with venom. Ruth, come on in. Hope you're hungry. I've been slaving away in here all afternoon. She emerged with a glass of white wine in hand, wearing a silk-wrap dress and stiletto heels that clicked like a metronome against the hardwood. Her feet were adorned with a pair of unmistakably new designer shoes, gold-trimmed, red-bottomed, practically daring Ruth to notice. Ruth noticed. Dinner was set with matching linen napkins and gleaming silverware, the kind of setting Carla saved for Instagram posts and company she wanted to impress. The scent of lemon and rosemary hung in the air, thick and curated. They sat. Carla poured wine into Ruth's glass without asking. I hope you're not still mad about that whole card mix-up. I mean, things get lost all the time, right? Ruth smiled thinly. Apparently. Ethan chuckled awkwardly. Yeah, Mom. Remember that time you thought I stole your library keys and they turned up in the freezer? I do remember that, Ruth said, her tone unreadable. And I also remember how hard you laughed when you found out I was… Right. Carla's laugh was too sharp, like broken glass. Oh, come on. Let's not dwell on the past. We're here to eat, drink, and pretend we're a normal family for once. Ruth lifted her fork. Cheers to pretending. Dinner moved forward on rails of forced cheer. Carla dominated the conversation with stories of shopping sprees, spa packages, and manifesting abundance. Ethan mostly nodded, glancing at Ruth every few minutes like he was hoping she wouldn't explode. She didn't. She chewed slowly, her face calm, letting Carla fill the space with empty glamour. She noted every time Carla gestured with her hands, the glittering new rings, the Tiffany bracelet that hadn't been there last week. She logged each item the way she used to log overdue books, meticulously, unemotional, completely. Halfway through the meal, her phone buzzed in her purse. She excused herself under the pretense of checking her blood sugar and stepped out into the hallway, pretending not to notice Carla's eye roll. She opened the text from Betty. Marcus traced card use. ID matched Carla's DMV photo. They're caught. Ruth stared at the message until the words sank deep into her bloodstream. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She slid her phone back into her purse and leaned slightly against the hallway wall, listening to the distant sound of Carla laughing at her own joke in the dining room. Then, softly, under her breath, she whispered, "You think I'm frail. Watch me." It was 2 days after the dinner when Carla called again. "We're redoing the home office," she chirped over the phone. "Thought you might want to see the new shelving Ethan built? Plus, you haven't been over since we got the new floors in." Ruth hesitated for a beat. "Sure," she said. "I'd love to see the improvements." The words tasted strange coming out of her mouth, but she meant them. She wanted to see the improvement. The Delgado home smelled like artificial citrus and fresh varnish when Ruth stepped inside. Carla gave her the usual air kiss near her cheek and launched into a performative tour like she was hosting a home renovation show. "See how the hallway opens up now with the new paint?" she said, sweeping her arm like a flight attendant. "We went with eggshell serenity. Incredible, right?" "It's bright," Ruth said, trailing behind her. They passed through the kitchen, the dining room, and the freshly organized pantry with labeled baskets and fake succulents perched on the shelves. "And the pièce de résistance," Carla said, leading her up the staircase with a practiced sway in her hips. "Our new walk-in closet. You have to see it. It's better than the one in that model home we toured." Ruth blinked. "Closet?" Carla grinned. "I converted the guest bedroom. Every girl deserves a showroom." She pushed open a white double door, and Ruth froze. The room was massive. The walls were lined with floating shelves and backlit cubbies, all meticulously arranged. A full-length mirror glowed in the corner. Purses sat upright like royalty: Chanel, Prada, Louis Vuitton, each resting on its own velvet pedestal. Most had tags still hanging. Shoes, dozens of pairs, stood on angled racks. Jewelry glistened behind a locked glass case. Ruth felt her lungs tighten. It was all there. Carla stood in the doorway like a proud architect. "Sometimes I just come in here to breathe. Helps me manifest." Ruth offered a soft smile. "It's beautiful," Carla beamed. "Right? Anyway, I need to go check the roast. Help yourself to the upstairs bathroom if you need it." The moment Carla's heels clicked back down the hall, Ruth stepped inside. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She started on the left wall. Snap. Then moved to the center island. Snap. She zoomed in on the tags. SKU numbers, price stickers, boutique-specific barcodes. Every photo was evidence. A YSL clutch still in the dust. Bag. Snap. A limited edition Fendi tote with Leylon exclusive, stamped inside. Snap. The same Michael Kors watch Ruth had clocked at dinner, now displayed beside its twin. Each shutter click was a heartbeat. Her body hummed, not with fear, but purpose. This was no longer a suspicion, no longer a hunch. It was proof. Her phone buzzed in her hand, a message from Marcus. "Need visual links to confirm transactions. Anything with serials or boutique tags. We're close." Ruth typed back with one hand while lining up another shot with the other. In progress, closet full of items, she left me alone. Snap, snap, snap. She moved fast but careful, ducking low to avoid the mirror's reflection. Her breath echoed softly in the cavernous silence. She'd never trespassed before, never taken anything that wasn't hers. Yet this moment didn't feel criminal. It felt corrective. She finished with a final sweep, then backed out of the room, pulling the doors gently shut behind her. By the time she returned downstairs, Carla was bent over the oven, her back to the kitchen entrance. Ruth smoothed her blouse and sat quietly at the island as if nothing had happened. Ruth didn't sleep that night, not out of fear, but because she was organizing. Every photo, every file, every note. Her yellow legal pad now had 3 full pages of dates, store names, product descriptions, model number, and prices. She cross-referenced each entry with her bank ledger, the boutique websites, and Marcus's instructions. The next morning, her phone rang. Ethan. She stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Mom," he said, his voice soft, rehearsed. "Can we talk?" Ruth already knew what this was. Carla had likely sniffed out the subtle shift in tone, the silence that now hung between them like smoke. Something had tipped her off. Ruth kept her voice even. "When?" "Now. I'll come by." She didn't bother asking if Carla would be with him. They arrived together. Carla stormed in like she owned the house, her makeup flawless, her blouse silk, her expression a mask of forced concern. Ethan followed, hands in his pocket, eyes darting like a child walking into the principal's office. "I just think we all need to clear the air," Ethan began. "This tension isn't good for any of us." Ruth didn't offer them a seat. She stayed standing by the window, arms crossed. Carla wasted no time. "You're acting strange, Ruth. Avoiding us, whispering, taking little notes like we're criminals. I don't know what fantasy you've built in that head of yours, but you used my government benefits to buy handbags," Ruth said flatly. Carla scoffed. "You have no proof of that." "I do." Ethan held up his hands like a traffic cop. "Mom, look. You know how paperwork gets messed up. Debit card issues happen all the time. People mix things up. Maybe someone skimmed your number at the store. Maybe it got duplicated. That doesn't mean Carla—" Ruth cut him off. "Save it. You're both not as clever as you think." Carla narrowed her eyes. "So what? You're accusing your own family? Of theft? You're really going to sit here and throw that word around?" Ruth's face remained unreadable. Her tone dipped into something glacial. "We'll see." Carla took a step forward, lip curled. "You really want to make enemies out of the only people who still bother to check on you?" Ruth tilted her head. "That depends. Were you checking on me? Or checking my wallet?" The silence crackled between them. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her pocket, already knowing who it was. Marcus Green. "Don't escalate. Say nothing more. Let them hang themselves." Ruth locked the screen and turned it face down on the counter. "I think we're done here," she said. Ethan looked like he wanted to say something, an apology, a warning, maybe just, "Please stop." But he didn't. Carla stormed out without another word. Later that afternoon, Betty arrived with 2 grocery bags and a serious face. "You look like you just walked out of a war room," she said, setting down a rotisserie chicken and a bag of iced tea. "I nearly did." They sat at the table and Ruth spread out the printouts, notes, and photos. Betty scanned the evidence with a slow, impressed nod. "You ever think about law school?" "Too late for that," Ruth replied. "But not too late for this." Together, they placed items into plastic folders, labeled them, and arranged them by date. Betty's hands were surprisingly quick for 74. She worked like a woman who'd fought battles of her own. When they finished, Betty tapped a folder and said, "This is airtight." Ruth nodded. "Marcus thinks so too. He's filing for surveillance approval." Betty raised her brows. "Surveillance? He wants eyes on the next time they try it. Real-time arrest. Slam dunk." Betty gave a sly grin. "Now that's the Ruth I remember." The envelope was thin, cream-colored, and marked in red. "Notice. Payment rejected." Ruth stood at the kitchen counter in her robe, the coffee still brewing behind her, steam curling into the air like a silent question. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the envelope, more from instinct than fear. Inside, the note was terse. "Your September rent payment was returned due to insufficient funds. A $65 late fee has been assessed. Payment must be resolved within 5 business days to avoid further action." Her eyes skimmed the amount. $895. The exact figure Carla had spent at Shen and Gold. The same money Ruth had budgeted for rent, for groceries, for peace of mind. Her breath came in shallow through her nose. She walked over to the drawer near the fridge, second one down, where she kept her emergency cash, and pulled out a plain white envelope labeled "For Rainy Days." There were $420 in 20s and two $50 bills. She added it up, quietly, automatically. She would cover the fee, but barely. Later that afternoon, Ruth walked into Carla's house for a family check-in. Carla's words. The same curated smell of citrus and privilege hung in the air. Carla greeted her in a breezy blouse and yoga pants, holding a green smoothie in one hand and a phone in the other. She looked up and smiled like nothing had happened. "Hey, Ruth," she said, drawing out the greeting like a condescending hug. "Glad you could make it." Ethan was already seated in the living room, half watching a muted football game. They all sat down. Ruth crossed her legs, didn't speak. Carla smirked. "You look tired. Everything okay?" "I'm fine," Ruth said flatly. Carla took a long sip from her smoothie. "You know, maybe you should start thinking about assisted living. You'd get your meals, your meds, everything covered. No more stressing about finances." Ethan looked away. Ruth didn't blink. "I'm not stressed." Carla gave a theatrical sigh. "We're just saying, life gets complicated. You shouldn't be worrying about bounced checks at your age." Ethan rubbed his palms together. "Carla just means you shouldn't have to deal with financial stuff anymore. We could help manage it. Make sure bills get paid, cards don't get lost again." Ruth turned to look directly at him. So softly it almost didn't register, she said. "And yet, here we are." The silence after that sat thick between them. Ethan cleared his throat. Carla stood up, brushing non-existent crumbs off her pants. "Well, just think about it." Ruth stood too. "I have." Back home, she made tea without tasting it. Betty arrived a few minutes later with a bag of groceries and a look of concern she didn't bother to hide. "You okay?" Ruth handed her the rent notice. Betty read it, then placed it down like a live wire. "They want you rattled," she said. "Keep you off balance. If you start to look unstable, you stop being credible." "I know. They're trying to build a case against you before yours reaches court." "I know." Betty leaned forward, quiet but fierce. "Then don't give them anything to work with." Ruth nodded, her eyes stinging but dry. "They're not getting a crack in the wall, Betty." "Not one." She sat at her computer and pulled up a new email. 2. Marcus.green@ssa.gov. Subject: Update. Retaliation pattern attachment. Rent_notice.pdf. Carla_comment_audio.mp3. Marcus: This morning I received a bounced rent check notice from my landlord. I believe the timing is deliberate. Later, Carla and Ethan suggested assisted living and implied I'm unfit to handle finances. I recorded part of the exchange for documentation. I'm still clear, still steady, just keeping you in the loop. Ruth. She clicked send. The Galleria was a palace of polished marble and curated indulgence, a place Ruth had visited many times in her younger years, though never with the intention of buying. She used to come for the air conditioning, the window shopping, and the comfort of watching people who looked like they belonged here. Now, she was here with purpose. She passed storefronts glowing with golden spotlights and shimmering mannequins, her sensible shoes squeaking slightly against the tile. Her coat was pressed, her scarf a pale blue that softened her sharp features, and her bag held a neatly organized folder of documentation. But it was Ruth's posture that had changed. She walked with the deliberate confidence of a woman carrying truth in her hands. When she reached the boutique Leland, she paused briefly to take in the display. A silver mannequin wearing a floor-length cream coat, cinched with a belt that likely cost more than Ruth's monthly income. The windows gleamed, promising luxury behind the glass. Inside, the lighting shifted to a flattering golden hue. A store associate with flawless skin and a sleek ponytail approached immediately, her eyes taking in Ruth's age, her clothes, the absence of any visible brand. "Can I help you?" the associate asked, polite but visibly disinterested. "I have an appointment," Ruth replied calmly, "with Janelle Carter. She's expecting me." The woman's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she nodded. "This way, please." She was led through a discreet hallway at the back of the boutique, where the glamour faded into plain white walls, and the faint scent of printer paper replaced the perfume-laced air of the showroom. The hallway ended at a modest office with a metal placard on the door. Janelle Carter, store manager. The woman inside stood as Ruth entered. "Mrs. Delgado," she said, with a warm, professional tone. "I'm Janelle. Thank you for coming in." Ruth offered a hand, and the two women shook. Janelle's grip was confident, businesslike. She was dressed in all black, tailored slacks, a silk blouse, hair pulled back neatly. No flash, no ego, just control. "Please, have a seat," Janelle said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Ruth lowered herself into the seat with composure. Her purse rested on her lap, her hands folded over it. "I reviewed your case with Marcus Green this morning," Janelle began, opening a folder already prepared with several documents. "He said you might be visiting, and I've pulled everything we have on the transaction in question." She laid out the first item, a printed receipt. "Here's the purchase Carla Delgado made with the Direct Express card. The name on the transaction matches yours." Ruth leaned forward and read it closely. The amount, $2,300, burned into her mind like a scar. Janelle continued. "Next is the copy of the ID used during the sale. Our protocol requires a scan for any purchase over $2,000. She placed a printed scan in front of Ruth. It was Carla's face, but it was Ruth's name. Ruth stared at it, her throat tightening with a mix of anger and strange relief. This was what she needed, something undeniable. "And this," Janelle said, turning her desktop monitor, "is the still from our in-store security feed. You'll see her handing over the card at the counter, time-stamped. September 3rd, 2:36 p.m. Ruth examined the screen. Carla stood there, dressed in her usual performative elegance, one hand resting on the counter while the other held out the card with casual entitlement. "That's her," Ruth confirmed quietly. "That's Carla." Janelle nodded. "I thought something felt off at the time. She acted like she didn't know what she was buying, just wanted the most expensive items we carried. And when I saw the name on the card, I remembered it because, well, most people don't use Social Security benefits in here. Would you be willing to testify to that?" Ruth asked. The question hung in the air for only a moment before Janelle responded, steady and sure. "For you?" "Absolutely." Ruth blinked, slightly taken aback by the swiftness of the answer. "Why me?" Janelle offered a faint, knowing smile. "Because you didn't back down. And because this happens more than you think. Elder fraud. Most of the time, no one pushes back. But you did. And you're right." Ruth exhaled slowly, something easing in her chest. For weeks now, she'd felt like she was shouting into the wind. But here, in this fluorescent-lit back office, someone had finally said it out loud. She reached into her purse, retrieved her yellow legal pad, and carefully wrote, "Leilon, $2,300. ID confirmed. CCTV plus receipt." "Janelle Carter will testify." Janelle leaned over to look at the pad, then smiled wider. "You're documenting all of this?" "I was a librarian," Ruth said. "Paper trails are how I breathe." The Galleria pulsed with its usual rhythm, escalators gliding, latte foam swirling, shopping bags swinging from manicured hands. But somewhere between the clean glass storefronts and the perfume-laced air, something unusual was about to happen. Ruth sat in the cafe on the second floor, directly across from Nordwell Designer Outlet, a boutique with high-end accessories. Stacked under recessed lighting and lockable cabinet, she sipped slowly from a plain paper cup of tea, her fingers curled calmly around the cardboard sleeve. Her eyes, however, never left the boutique below. She wasn't alone. To her left sat a man in plain clothes, flipping through a newspaper with slow, calculated disinterest. He was SSA. To her right, two officers stood near a pillar, seemingly watching foot traffic. They weren't. They were watching the register. Inside the boutique, Janelle stood behind the counter, dressed impeccably in a black blazer and soft pink blouse. She'd agreed, not just to testify, but to help set the trap in motion. The plan was simple. Wait for Carla and Ethan to return. Let them try again. Let them walk right into it. And if they did, everything would change. Ruth watched the clock. 2:04 p.m. Then, like clockwork, the glass door to the boutique opened. Carla entered first, arm looped through Ethan's. She wore dark jeans, red heels, and oversized sunglasses. Indoors, as always. Ethan walked beside her, his posture slightly hunched, like a man being pulled toward something he couldn't quite justify, but couldn't quite resist either. From her vantage point above, Ruth could see the greed in Carla's stride. She pointed quickly toward a leather tote on a middle shelf, then something in the display case. Janelle greeted them like any other customer, her expression unreadable. Her fingers tapped the register's touchscreen with measured professionalism. Ethan leaned on the counter, sliding something forward, likely the Direct Express card. Ruth couldn't hear the exchange, but she saw Carla nod, laughing, tossing her hair. It was all part of the performance. Janelle took the card. She turned her back to the counter, held it for just a second longer than necessary, then casually reached up and adjusted the gold earring in her left ear. That was the signal. The man with the newspaper folded it in half and tapped his earpiece. One of the officers near the pillar stepped off casually, the other trailing a few steps behind. They walked slowly but deliberately into the boutique, as if they were just another pair of customers, but Carla saw them. Even behind the tinted lenses, Ruth recognized the flicker of panic in her daughter-in-law's body. It was in the sharp turn of her head, the sudden tightness in her shoulders. She said something quickly to Ethan, who stared blankly at the approaching officers. Janelle didn't flinch. She simply reached for a receipt and slid the card behind the counter. The taller officer stepped forward and showed his badge. "Carla Delgado?" he asked. Carla's voice cracked into a protest Ruth couldn't hear from across the mall, but the tone needed no translation. Denial, rage, indignation. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Carla's voice rose, loud enough for nearby shoppers to pause mid-step. Ethan stood frozen, still clutching the tote bag Carla had handed him. "Sir," the second officer said to him, "we're going to need you to step aside." Carla spun toward Ethan. "Say something. Tell them it's yours." But Ethan couldn't speak. He looked small, deflated, years of spinelessness collapsing under the weight of consequence. The officers retrieved the handbag, the receipt, and the card from the counter. Janelle pointed to the surveillance camera above them, then back to the terminal screen. Everything was in place. Everything was recorded. Ruth exhaled, slowly, quietly, like someone exhaling the final ounce of doubt she had left. She rose from her table and walked toward the escalator, not rushing, not hiding. Below her, Carla's voice echoed louder now, demanding to see a manager, as if she hadn't just been caught red-handed. The interview rooms at the Houston Police Department were as Ruth had imagined them, drab, underlit, and designed to erode arrogance. Cinderblock walls painted institutional gray, a single metal chair on either side of a bolted-down table, and the faint hum of an air vent that seemed to buzz louder the longer you sat still. Ruth wasn't inside them, but she had been invited to wait outside the observation room, behind a pane of soundproof glass. Marcus stood beside her, arms folded, his gaze sharp but unreadable. "We're separating them. It's better this way inside." Ethan sat with his hands on the table, fidgeting with his wedding ring. His hair was damp with sweat, his shoulders hunched like a boy waiting for a parent's scolding. Across the hallway, Carla sat in a second room. She had asked for a different chair, then complained about the lighting, then demanded to call a lawyer. She wasn't given the option. Not yet. "Are they both under arrest?" Ruth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Detained for questioning," Marcus said. "But the evidence is solid. The video, the card, the statement, your documentation. It's already enough. We just want them to confirm it." Ruth stared through the glass. Ethan looked up at the ceiling like it might offer him an escape hatch. She didn't feel pity. She felt something colder. Inside the room, a detective sat across from Ethan. She placed a stack of documents in front of him. Printouts from Ruth's bank account, boutique receipts, signatures. "Mr. Delgado," the detective said, her tone firm but patient. "These are transactions made with your mother's Social Security account. Most of them were in person. Some involved store video. Others were signed for. This signature here." She tapped one of the forms. "It's yours, correct?" Ethan blinked, then nodded. "Yes. I mean, yes. I signed it. Why?" He hesitated. "Because Carla said it was fine. She said we were just helping out. That it was better than her letting the card go to waste." The detective didn't flinch. "So she gave you the card?" She told me Mom said it was okay. I didn't ask questions. I should have. I didn't want to fight." Carla always handles the money. Did your mother ever directly tell you to use that card? Ethan's voice broke a little. No. Did you know it was illegal? His silence was the only answer she needed. Marcus turned to Ruth. He just admitted to signing multiple withdrawals tied to the Direct Express account. That's financial abuse under Texas Penal Code 32.45 and a federal violation under the Social Security Act. Carla convinced him? Ruth said. Marcus nodded. Sure, but he signed. That makes him liable. Inside the second room, Carla was unraveling faster. She said she was going to give us that money anyway, she snapped. She's been saying for years she doesn't care about material things. She gave Ethan access to her house, her mail. She knew we were struggling. You used her government-issued card, the second detective said. You copied her ID. That's identity fraud. I didn't copy anything. Ethan did. So you're saying your husband stole from his own mother and you just… What? Used the bags to support him? Carla paused, mouth open, then closed it again. I'm not the one who signed anything, she finally muttered. Back outside, Ruth let her arms fall to her sides. Her fingers ached from clenching. Her breath felt shallow. You okay? Marcus asked. No, Ruth replied. But I'm clear. Marcus placed a folder into her hands. This is the updated case file. With both of them cooperating and contradicting each other, we've passed the point of defense. We'll likely be filing multiple felony counts. Ruth stared at the folder. It felt heavier than paper should, heavier than just facts. Across from her, through the glass, Ethan was still talking, still fidgeting, still hoping, maybe, that the truth would bend in his favor if he softened it enough. But truth didn't bend. Not anymore. That night, back at Ruth's house, Betty sat with her in the quiet kitchen. The clock ticked steadily in the background as the kettle cooled on the stove. So it's real now, Betty said softly. They're both going down. Ruth nodded, her gaze unfixed. I knew she'd do it. But Ethan, her voice cracked just for a moment. He was my only child. Betty reached across the table and took her hand. And he chose her over you. Ruth closed her eyes, then opened them again, colder than before. Now, she said, the law gets to choose. The courtroom was colder than Ruth expected, not just in temperature, but in tone. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, pale and impartial, casting long shadows against the polished floor. Everything smelled faintly of varnished wood and the stale breath of bureaucracy. Judge Wilkins presided from the bench like a monument, tall, severe, and unimpressed by theatrics. His white hair was combed flat, his glasses perched low on his nose, and the gavel sat beside him untouched, as though he only used it when absolutely necessary. His eyes skimmed the docket, then drifted toward the defense table. Carla sat straight-backed, her hands clasped in her lap like a penitent schoolgirl. She wore a conservative gray dress and minimal makeup, but Ruth knew the performance by now. Her face, pale under the courtroom lights, had been deliberately stripped of her usual flair. A calculated choice, a costume. Ethan sat beside her, shoulders slightly rounded, his blazer a size too big. He looked like he was trying to shrink into the woodwork. Ruth didn't shrink. She sat near the front, legs crossed at the ankle, a cardigan buttoned neatly over a navy blouse. In her lap rested a leather file folder. Betty had bought it for her the week before at an office supply store downtown. It was nothing fancy, but it held everything: her documentation, her timeline, her evidence. It was, in its own way, her armor. Marcus sat to her right, calm and professional, flipping through his own file. His tie was dark, his voice measured, and when he rose to speak, the courtroom quieted. Your Honor, he began, the state contends that this is not a case of confusion, nor of miscommunication. It is a case of sustained, documented, and deliberate financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, Mrs. Ruth Delgado, by both the defendants seated before you today. He began laying out the timeline with the confidence of someone who had seen too much to be rattled. The first fraudulent transaction, the duplicated ID, the misuse of a Direct Express federal benefits card, the video footage from the boutique, the signed receipts, the matching serial numbers on the luxury items. One by one, they came out like puzzle pieces falling into place. Carla dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, but the sniffles were dry. Ethan tried to look stoic, occasionally nodding in false understanding, his expression a patchwork of guilt and hope. But Judge Wilkins barely glanced their way. Then Marcus called the store manager. Janelle walked in with precise steps, her black blazer tailored perfectly to her form, her hair neatly tied back. She didn't hesitate when she took the stand. Her voice was steady, clear, and free of embellishment. "I witnessed the purchase," she said. "I handled the card myself." The ID copy showed Mrs. Delgado's name, but the photo was of the woman seated there. She pointed to Carla without flinching. "It didn't match, so I held the receipt. Then I reported the transaction." "Do you recognize this receipt?" Marcus asked, handing her a printout. She nodded. "That's the one I retained. And this video still?" "Yes, that's her using the card at my register." "Would you describe Mrs. Delgado's reaction when you first contacted her?" "She was calm, clear, concerned. She answered all my questions. She didn't act confused. She followed up with documentation I didn't ask for. Honestly, she handled herself like a prosecutor." A few quiet chuckles from the back of the room. Even the judge's mouth twitched. Janelle stepped down. The defense tried to object, but it was half-hearted and late. Carla's attorney stumbled through an argument about intent, something about financial desperation, about misunderstandings between family members, about blurred lines of consent. But when the judge leaned forward, all pretense vanished. Consent does not extend to falsified ID, state-issued benefit misuse, or identity theft. The facts presented today, video, receipts, and sworn testimony, are not a family misunderstanding. They're a paper trail. Ruth didn't move. Her hands remained steady on her file. She'd written every piece of that trail. The house was silent, but Ruth couldn't rest. It was nearly midnight, and the familiar creaks in the floorboards sounded louder now. They weren't comforting anymore. Not like they had been when the house was full of laughter, or at least predictability. Now, even her own walls seemed to echo with uncertainty. She had changed into flannel pajamas, a soft navy set with worn elbows, but she hadn't yet sat down. She moved from room to room without meaning to, like a ghost haunting her own life, checking the front door lock, then the stove knob, then the living room lamp. Again and again. She wasn't checking for safety. She was checking for control. Betty was asleep in the guest room, her coat draped over the chair, her shoes placed neatly beside the bed. She had offered to stay without Ruth even asking, just walked in with her overnight bag and said, "You shouldn't be alone tonight." Ruth hadn't argued. In the kitchen, the kettle sat unused. She'd turned it on twice and turned it off before it whistled both times. Her tea mug, white, ceramic, a faint hairline crack along the side, sat empty on the counter. She opened the fridge. Not out of hunger, but out of habit, then closed it again. The glow from the microwave clock read 12:21 a.m. Ruth leaned against the counter and looked down at her feet. The tile felt cool through her slippers. She wrapped her arms around herself and closed her eyes. In the silence, Ethan's voice echoed. Not the one from the courtroom, stiff and ashamed, but the one from years ago. The boy who used to sit on the floor with Legos, the teenager who begged for extra gas money, the adult son who once told her at Christmas, "You don't care about money, Mom. You care about control." It had stung then. Now, it made her stomach tighten. Control? She never wanted control. She wanted decency, accountability, boundaries. But maybe to Ethan, those had felt like the same thing. She opened her eyes, shaking the thought loose. "I'm not done," she whispered aloud, as if saying it would ground her. Her laptop pinged from across the room. A new email. She walked to the desk and sat down, for the first time all evening. It was from Marcus. Subject: Stay steady. Just a quick update. Judge Wilkins has requested written statements from all involved before issuing final sentencing recommendation. No delays expected. I'll handle the filings. You've already done the hard part. Rest tonight. You've earned it. MG Ruth stared at the message for a long moment, rereading the line. You've already done the hard part. Had she? Because sitting still, waiting, might have been the hardest thing of all. She replied simply, "Thank you. Still here. Still steady. RD." She powered down the screen and turned out the desk light. In the guest room, Betty stirred slightly but didn't wake. Ruth lay in bed and pulled the blanket up to her chest. She stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows play across the plaster, the same way they had for years. The difference now was that she no longer feared what they hid. She feared what they'd already revealed. For the first time in weeks, her body began to sink into the mattress. Her breath evened out. Her fingers relaxed. She didn't dream. Her mind didn't race, just stillness. The courtroom was nearly full, though no one spoke above a whisper. Every cough, every shift of paper seemed amplified in the stillness. Ruth sat in the second row, her spine straight, her folder clutched in her lap even though it wasn't needed anymore. The verdict was coming. Judge Wilkins entered without ceremony. His black robe brushed the floor as he climbed the steps to the bench. No gavel, just the creak of old wood and the weight of finality. He adjusted his glasses and began, not with thunder, but with clarity. This court has reviewed all written statements and testimonies submitted in the case of Ruth M. Delgado versus Carla Delgado and Ethan Delgado. Ruth's heart began to pound, not out of fear, but anticipation. She felt Betty's hand gently touch hers on the bench beside her. She didn't look over. She just held on. The judge's voice continued, steady. In reviewing the financial records, signed withdrawal forms, surveillance footage, ID documentation, and corroborating testimony, this court finds that Ruth M. Delgado was a victim of intentional financial exploitation. A ripple passed through the room like a wave breaking on stone. Ruth's throat tightened. He wasn't finished. The defendant, Carla Delgado and Ethan Delgado, knowingly accessed and used federal benefits belonging to Mrs. Delgado under false pretenses. Further, both defendants attempted to mislead this court regarding intent, consent, and the nature of the transaction. Carla flinched. Ethan's shoulders sagged. Mrs. Delgado is declared legally competent, and no evidence has been submitted to suggest cognitive decline, financial mismanagement, or impaired decision-making capacity. Ruth let out a slow breath, a release, like something had unclenched deep in her chest. Restitution is hereby ordered in the full amount of $6,510 to be paid to Mrs. Delgado within 60 days, Carla gasped. Ethan swallowed hard but said nothing. Judge Wilkins looked toward the back of the courtroom where Marcus sat, then back toward the defense table. In addition, the matter of fraudulent use of government-issued benefits, identity theft, and elder financial exploitation is being referred to federal prosecutors. This court has no jurisdiction over the sentencing in those matters, but it recommends prosecution in full accordance with the Social Security Act and Texas state law. There was no outburst, no sobs, just the silence of consequences arriving. Judge Wilkins paused, then leaned slightly forward, his voice quieter now, but no less sharp. This court reminds the defendants that familial proximity does not give you license to take what does not belong to you. Blood may offer you trust, but when you violate that trust, what remains is not family. It is fraud. The bailiff called order, and the judge rose, gavel untouched. Case closed. Ruth did not cry. Not yet. She stood slowly. Her knees ached, but her stance was firm. She felt Betty's arm wrap around her shoulders as they turned to leave. For the first time in weeks, Ruth didn't feel smaller than the room she stood in. As she passed the defense table, Ethan looked up, but only for a moment. His eyes, red-rimmed, ashamed, reaching, met hers. Ruth held his gaze. No anger, no softness, just the unflinching recognition of a son who had made his choice. He looked away. Carla didn't look at her at all. Her lips were pressed into a bitter, disbelieving line, her jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might crack. Out in the hallway, the air smelled different, cleaner, somehow, as though justice had left its own scent behind. Marcus joined them at the elevator, offering Ruth a soft nod and a single sentence, "You're whole again." She didn't answer right away. She didn't have to. She squeezed Betty's hand and let herself breathe, deeply, steadily. "Let's go home," she said. They stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and for the first time in a long time, Ruth didn't feel watched, doubted, or dismissed. She felt believed. The headline ran above the fold in the Houston Tribune 2 days later. "Mother outsmarts son and daughter-in-law in fraud case." And beneath it, a smaller line, "Elderly woman wins court battle over stolen Social Security funds." There was a photo, file archive, not new, of Ruth exiting the courthouse in a navy blouse and cardigan, folder in hand, jaw set like a woman who had already buried her grief and moved on to accountability. Betty clipped 3 copies. Ruth didn't keep any. She had no interest in the spotlight. When the news van idled outside her block for 10 minutes that afternoon, she closed the blinds and finished her crossword in the kitchen. When a local reporter left a voicemail asking for a quick interview about the historic implications, Ruth deleted it without replaying. There were no statements to be made. She had already told the truth. Once, clearly, and with evidence. That was enough. The morning after the verdict, she walked the neighborhood loop near the community park, the same route she had taken for years, only now it felt slightly different. At the corner where the hydrangeas bloomed, Mrs. Wells from 2 doors down waved from her porch and called out, "We're proud of you, Ruth." And when she reached the mailbox, someone had left a small bouquet wrapped in brown paper. No card. She stood there for a long moment, sunlight warming her shoulders, the rustling wind cutting through the silence. Gratitude didn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it whispered, and Ruth had learned how to hear it. That evening, Betty hosted a dinner at Ruth's house. A small affair, just the two of them. A roast chicken, a bottle of wine, and a chocolate tart from the bakery off Montrose. To survival, Betty said, raising her glass. Ruth tapped her own against it. To stubbornness. They laughed, real laughter, the kind that started in the stomach, not just the mouth. Halfway through the meal, Marcus called. "Just wanted to say congratulations again," he said. "You know, this case is already making waves. SSA's regional office flagged it in a training memo this morning. Elder fraud prevention. They're calling it a precedent." Ruth leaned back in her chair. "That's nice. You don't sound surprised." "I'm not. Paper trails matter." "I told you that?" "You did," Marcus said, a warm edge to his voice. "Well, you've earned some peace. Let it come." She hung up, poured Betty another half glass, and let herself smile. Just a little. The next week, Ruth met with her estate attorney, a quiet man named Alan, whom she'd known since Ethan was in high school. He looked older now, or maybe Ruth just hadn't noticed the passing of time until recently. They sat in his office, surrounded by stacks of unremarkable legal books and the faint scent of lemon oil and ink. "I'd like to revise the will," Ruth said, placing a new folder on his desk. Alan opened it, his eyebrows lifted. "Cutting them out entirely?" he asked gently. Ruth nodded. "The house, the assets, the life insurance, all of it. Carla and Ethan are not to be named anywhere." He paused. "Do you want to name a secondary heir?" "I'll leave that to the charitable foundation we discussed. Local library systems, elder protection work. Let the next Ruth Delgado feel less alone than I did." Alan didn't ask another question. He just slid the papers across and handed her a pen. That night, Ruth slept with the window cracked open. The night air moved softly across her skin. There were no strange sounds to chase, no shadows to decode. Her body lay still, her muscles not coiled in anticipation, but at ease. And when sleep came, it came fully. No dreams, no echoes of Ethan's voice, no tightness in her chest, just dark, cool quiet, and the sound of nothing needing to be fixed. The ballroom smelled faintly of lemon oil and folding chairs, not the kind of place Ruth ever imagined herself standing in, let alone behind a podium. But there she was, fingers brushing the edge of the lectern, her yellow folder resting squarely in front of her. The banner overhead read, "Protecting the Vulnerable, Elder Fraud Awareness and Prevention, sponsored by the Texas Commission on Aging." She took a breath. The microphone hummed. Rows of faces looked back at her. Social workers, policy writers, case investigators, a few scattered students in the back scribbling into notepads. It wasn't a packed stadium, but it was the right room. "Good afternoon," she began. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, even, grounded. "My name is Ruth Delgado. I'm 73. A retired librarian, a mother, a widow." She let that hang in the air for a moment. Then, and until a few months ago, I was the legal owner of a handbag I didn't know existed, a watch I never wore, and a credit trail that nearly cost me my home. A ripple of quiet laughter, but it didn't linger. "I'm here today, not because I want sympathy, and not because I'm unique, but because I'm not." Ruth opened the yellow folder slowly, deliberately. She laid out the documents like sacred artifacts, the bank statements, the boutique receipts, the photocopied ID, the still images from security footage. "These," she said, her voice firmer now, "are how I got my life back. Not one of these pages is loud, not one is glamorous, but together, They made a case loud enough to be heard by a federal courtroom. Her hands rested on either side of the podium. She looked out over the audience and let her gaze settle. If you're here today, it's because someone, somewhere, needs you to see them. Not as paranoid, not as forgetful, not as just getting old, but as a person trying to be believed. She paused. I was believed. Eventually, but not without a fight. There was no music swell, no standing ovation cue, but when she stepped back, there was a moment of silence, and then the room rose. Not quickly, not theatrically, just one by one. A ripple of standing bodies and clapping hands. People who'd read about her, people who hadn't, people who saw their clients in her, people who saw their mothers. Ruth smiled once, small, then stepped off the stage. Betty met her in the wings with a tissue and watery eyes. You, she whispered, look 10 years younger. Ruth tilted her head, wiped a tear from her cheek, and said, Justice is my facelift. They laughed, and it wasn't brittle. Back at the table reserved for speakers, a card and small bouquet waited, pale lilies in a clear glass jar. The note, written in neat script, read, Survivor, not victim. Janelle Ruth placed the card in her bag and turned toward the hallway where investigators were gathering around a coffee station, already dissecting the details of her case. She walked toward them, not slowly, not reluctantly, just steady. She shared the folder again, answered questions, listened as one agent called it, the most complete civilian file I've ever seen. She didn't need that praise, but it was a useful reminder. She had turned being overlooked into being undeniable. The conference ended with boxed lunches and exchanged emails. By the time Ruth and Betty walked back to the car, the air had shifted. Autumn finally smelled like autumn, crisp leaves underfoot, faint smoke in the breeze. You ready to go home? Betty asked as she started the engine. Not yet, Ruth said. Let's drive a little. They did. Just past the freeway ramp, Ruth leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes for a moment, not because she was tired, but because, for once, she didn't need to keep them open to stay safe. No locks to check, no shadows to track. She was through the fire, and still herself.